bad things. He's been a bad boy. And over here, in a sense, Yehuda transforms himself. And remember, we all grow up, right? Or we're supposed to grow up. And we're supposed to not be the way we were as teenagers. And sometimes you see people on the streets, and not too long ago I saw a guy that I went to high school with. And he was in the streets, and I said, this guy never grew up. He actually looked older than me, but he never grew up. He's still kind of out there. And we need to grow up. Growing up physically, growing up spiritually, mentally is very important. And so whenever there's growth factors, we need to take them. Here's one of those growth factors for Yehuda, for Judah. In fact, this growth factor for Yehuda transforms him into the man that Adonai wants him to be, and the ancestor of David and the ancestor of Yeshua. Now, he had been a bad boy. He was doing all kinds of bad things. But over here, in the midst of this situation, with Yaakov back in Canaan land, with Joseph wanting to keep Benjamin here, you guys could go back, but I'll keep Benjamin here. And of course, Yehuda comes, and Vayigash says, and he drew near. Now remember, we're talking here about ancient protocol. Joseph is the second to Pharaoh. In a sense, the vice president of the land. He has all these retainers in front of him. He probably has all these soldiers with spears, guys with swords protecting him. And the pharaohs and ancient kings in Babylon and Egypt, they used to have a rod. And that rod, if you went like that, you allowed someone to come before you. If you brought it here, you closed it off. And in a sense, you couldn't just go up. You couldn't climb to the inner circle of the Pharaoh, of the king. You had to ask permission. In fact, we see this in the book of Esther. Even Esther, the queen, says, I can't just go up to the king. He could have my neck, and she was the queen. Now remember, she dared to go up, and she went up. And what happened? The king, her husband, let her through. We see the same thing here. Yehuda has no right to go up to the inner area of Pharaoh. And it says, Vayigash, then Yehuda drew near and said, may it please Adoni. In your English, King James, Catholic, Protestant Bibles type, it has my Lord. Most of them say my Lord. It should actually be my master. Translate that to my master every time you read it from now on. Not my Lord, my master. And it's the word Adoni, from the word Adon. Adon means master. Adon is someone who owns property. En español tenemos Don Francisco, Don Juan. In Spanish we have people named Don Francisco. Don is not his first name. The word Don in a designation like that means Mr., where we get the word master, where we get the word sir. So it's someone that owns land. And in Spanish, Don Francisco comes from Adon Francisco, from my Lord, my Master in King James, and in the way we should actually translate it in English. And so he calls him Adoni, my master. By the way, this is the same word that is used for Adonai, except that Adonai is plural. Always remember, when you address someone singular, Adon, master, Adoni, my master. But when Adonai, when Yahweh is addressed, it's always Adonai in the plural. In other words, Yahweh is addressed as masters. Why is he addressed as masters? Because he's plural. Yahweh is a plurality, and he's addressed that way. So over here, Yehuda addresses him as my master. Let your servant have a word privately. Wait a second, privately? You can't just come up here and we could have a personal conversation. You know, they don't do that. Now, if the Pharaoh wants to have, or the associate, or one of the leaders, remember, things are done from the top down, not from the down up. You don't tell someone up, I want this. The one upstairs says, I want this, and you do it. But Yehuda, you know, this is what in Hebrew is called chutzpah. Chutzpah. This guy's bold. Yehuda gets up there and says, Adoni, he draws near. And he says, may I have a word privately? I want to talk to you privately. Do not be angry with your servant, for you are like Pharaoh himself. Remember, when you see Joseph, you see Pharaoh. When Joseph speaks, Pharaoh speaks. When Joseph is silent, Pharaoh is silent, because Joseph is Pharaoh to the people. And even Yehuda noticed that. He says, you are like Pharaoh himself. My master questioned his servants. And he goes on to the story. Like most Hebrew, they elaborate. He goes and tells the story of what's happened so far. And how leaving Benjamin would kill Yaakov. And this would be his end. And his heart is bound. The heart of Yaakov is bound. Once again, we see this in a familiar sense in the family with Yaakov and with Benjamin. In chapter 45, verse 1, then Joseph could not control his feelings in front of all his retainers, and he said, let everyone leave. You know, ahí está la puerta, there's the door. Everybody, all my retainers, all his Egyptian servants are to leave. This leaves the whole room, probably something about this size, with just Joseph on the throne and the 10 brothers there, the 11 brothers there with Benjamin, and they're alone. This parsha is a parsha that this part really, I always get this passion for what happens here. Everybody leaves the room and he's crying. They don't recognize who he is. Remember, he knows who they are, but they don't know who this second to Pharaoh is. He's talking Egyptian and he's using translators, but now all the translators are gone. The retainers are gone. The servants are gone. There's no one with spears there. There's no one with swords there. Everybody's gone. And he's alone. Now think of it. In their minds, what's he going to do? In their minds, how could he talk to them? He's talked with translators. But now, it says he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard, and the news reached Pharaoh's palace. By the way, Pharaoh's palace and Joseph's palace are some 18 miles away. So as soon as the Egyptians heard Joseph crying, one thing that they had in those days was a Pony Express type thing that right away Pharaoh heard everything. Whatever you said, Pharaoh heard it. And all of a sudden, the retainers that have been asked to leave now hear him crying, and right away they go to Pharaoh to tell Pharaoh. And then Joseph said to his brothers, verse 3, Ani Yosef, in Hebrew, not in Egyptian, not in Spanish, not in English. He says, Ani Yosef. Ani Yosef. Is my father really still alive? And he says this in Hebrew. The brothers could not answer him. They were dismayed at the sight. And Joseph says to his brothers, come closer to me. When they had come closer, he said to them, I am your brother, your Achi. Ani Achi. I am your brother Yosef, Ani Achi Yosef, whom you sold into Egypt. Now what would you have done? You sold him. You wanted to kill him. You hated him. You were jealous of him. He told you stories that you were going to bow down to him. And you laughed at him for that. And now they've been bowing down to him. The prophetic dreams that Joseph had came true. And now he says, Ani Yosef, Ani Achi, I am your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now, do not grieve. Here is where reconciliation matters. Whether forgiveness is asked first or not, it is our responsibility to reconciliate ourselves to them, not them to us. Now, if I were talking to people that needed to be reconciled, I say, you go up there and you repent to them. They have to go repent. But the one that is the victim, from Adonai's point of view, he has to forgive first. Now, can you imagine if everyone forgave first, the victim and the victimizers? We'd have reconciliation all the time. But pride does not let us go either way. But here, Joseph, the victim of a possible murder, a victim of being sold, a victim of hatred and abuse, says, I'm your brother, do not grieve. Do not reproach yourselves for having sold me here, since Elohim sent me before you to preserve your lives. Think of it. We say so many times what Satan means for evil, Adonai uses for good. You know, it doesn't matter what happens in our families. It doesn't matter how people are towards us. Adonai will use every one of our situations for good. For good. What does Paul say in Romans? all things work together for the good, for them that love Adonai, for them that are called according to his purposes. Joseph was called according to the purposes of Adonai. And now Adonai is using that for good. It was hard being sold, the anguish of being sold as a 17-year-old. Remember, he was 17. Anybody here 17? Can you imagine being sold as a 17-year-old by your sisters? They sell you off. Te mandan. Te venden. Vete. Get out of here. And now, all those years that he goes and works for Potiphar and then his wife, and then because you didn't do what she said, they throw you in prison, and you're in prison for 10, 12 years. And you give interpretations to dreams that you think are going to get you out, but you're still in there. Finally, you get elevated to the top. When you get elevated to the top, of the first time these 10 boys appeared before you, man, you could have just told these guys, cut their heads off. You could have done that. Revenge would do that. But Joseph is a man of Elohim. He's a tzaddik. He's a righteous man. He is a holy man, as we all should be. From being a 17-year-old holy man, think of it. A tzaddik at 17, able to resist Potiphar's wife, able to, in prison, endure prison life. And now, he has them before him. And he says, don't grieve. This wasn't you. Yeah, it was you. You're responsible. But it really wasn't you. It was Adonai. Because he sent me here to preserve your lives. Not only your lives now in the famine, because of the famine, but the people of Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov, and the promises that Adonai had made to these three patriarchs, that through one of their seed, the Messiah was going to come to preserve Israel. Israel was preserved, and for 400 years, as slaves later on, they are preserved. And Adonai raises Moses and delivers our people, brings us back to Israel, and then Adonai raises a king, David, and then through him comes Yeshua the Messiah. Yeshua is born. Think of it. This act of Joseph, his being victimized, he's being elevated, all these things that is happening here is because of one purpose, and that's the birth of Messiah. We're going to see later on that Judah, Yehuda, not because as a youngster he was a bad boy, but Adonai forgave, because he rose up and he repented, and over here he becomes a man. He grew up. He grew up and he left his childish behavior away, and he grew up to become a man after Adonai's own heart. And Adonai is going to say next week, the scepter shall not pass from Yehuda till Messiah come, till Shiloh come, till he to whom it belongs comes. And that's Yeshua the Messiah. So the scepter excuse me, shall not pass from Yehuda till the one comes to whom the scepter really belongs. Remember, at this point, Israel had no king. These guys were just shepherd people, backward shepherd people from Canaan land. Hillbilly type people from Canaan. Sereños from Canaan in Spanish. And so what do we have here? We have Adonai bringing reconciliation. And in verse 7 he says, Elohim sent me before you to make sure that your race, the Hebrews, the Israelites, would have survivors in the land, and to save your lives, many lives at that. And that includes us here too. That includes those that are Jewish, that might be Israelite and don't know it. And that includes the Gentiles that have been grafted in. That includes every soul in here. Because if it wasn't for this act, remember we said last week, Satan has always been trying to abort Messiah. Over here, Joseph says, you know what? The abortion that Hasatan meant by destroying me didn't work again. And all his tried abortions of Messiah have never worked. They didn't work. Even throwing him, killing him on a cross, and burying him in the tomb, that abortion didn't work, because Yeshua, even though he died, on the third day he rose again from the dead, and he is alive today. This was all about to bring the promise of the seed. In your seed, Abraham, in your seed, Isaac, in your seed, Yaakov, and in the seed of Yehuda, and in the seed of David, the King David and Solomon and Nathan, would come the messianic prophets promised to fruition. And that gets us to the birth of Yeshua. And as I said, we are living right now in a culture, in a society that is predominantly Christian oriented, but is not biblically oriented. You see, you could be Christianly oriented and not biblically oriented. Christianity is a culture. Christianity is a culture. And it's a Western culture. It's a Western culture that has been influenced by pretty much Western paganism that was influenced by Eastern paganism. One of the things that we know is we know when Yeshua was born. We don't have to try to figure that out. And the birth of Yeshua, I wish we had time to go through the 300 prophecies of Yeshua's coming. We are told that that the Messiah was going to be born in Bethlehem. In fact, in Numbers it says, a star shall arise out of Yaakov, out of Jacob, a star's coming out of Jacob. That's Messiah. There's all these messianic prophecies of the coming of Messiah. That he's going to be born from a virgin. All these prophecies. That he's going to be the son of Elohim. All these prophecies were given to the patriarchs and to the prophets. David himself received all kinds of prophecies about that the Messiah was going to be his greater son. In fact, go with me to 1 Chronicles chapter 24. And here in chapter 24 of 1 Chronicles, David, one of the things that David does, in fact, Adonai, in 1 Chronicles 7, Adonai gives to David a prophecy that he's going to build his house through the Messiah. because David wanted to build a temple for Adonai. And Adonai says, no, you're a man whose hands are stained with blood. I'm going to build you a house. The house of David. The house of Messiah. And what David did in getting the temple ready, and after he died, Solomon builds it. But in getting everything ready, one of the things that he does in chapter 24, if you see there, he classifies the priests. And in verse 3 of chapter 24, it says, David divided them, the priests, into orders with the help of Zadok, and Zadok was one of Eleazar's sons. And they divide the priesthood, because by the time of David, there was so many priests, and everybody would always be there, and there were some priests who never got to minister. So what they did is they got a fair system of casting lots. And they divided all the priests that were at the time of David, they divided them in 24 courses, or 24 divisions, orders. And these were to go on a weekly basis twice a year. And if you go to verses verse 10, 11, 12, around there, each name is a verse, or every two names is a verse. But there it says Abijah the eighth. Underline that. Abijah the eighth. Aviah, Avi, my father, Yah is Yah. Aviah is my father is Yah. That would make a good boy's name. Aviah, my father is Yah. By the way, look at the ninth, Yeshua. Yeshua, the priest, the priest Yeshua was of the ninth order, and several other Yeshuas came from the ninth order. Yeshua was a common name from this time on. Now, from this time, Israel fell into idolatry. Israel fell into idolatry after David and Solomon in the kings, that Adonai had to divide after Solomon died and the kingdom divided, he had to take away the 10 nations from the north, and 2 tribes, Yehuda and Benjamin, went to Babylon and spent 70 years in Babylon, and then they came back. They came back. The reason we went to Babylon was because of idolatry. Idolatry was rampant, and idolatry is adultery. Idolatry is spiritual adultery. Adultery means contamination. And so we were contaminated by idols. We were contaminated by statues of wood, of stone, of iron. We were contaminated by trees, Asherah worship. On top of hills, they would put a tree, and people would worship it, an Asherah tree. They would get the branches of trees and form circles, and people would worship that. They would worship the tree, and they would worship these circles. And those were the male and female principles, and they would worship that. That's idolatry. That's pornographic idolatry. And people would worship that. And all these idols. In fact, they started worshiping Ishtar, the goddess, the mother goddess. And they fell into idolatry, our ancestors. And we were disciplined harshly because of it. At the end, go with me to the book of Malachi. Book of Malachi, Malachi. Malachi means my messenger. And at the end of what we call the Tanakh, I know The Catholic Church calls it the Old Testament, but do not call it the Old Testament. It's not old, and it's not a last will and testament. It's called the Tanakh, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. But in chapter 4 of the book of Malachi, the last book in the Tanakh, according to the Greek reading, the last thing that Adonai says for a long time, 400 years to be exact, the last thing he says in the Hebrew scriptures is, remember the Torah of my servant Moses. In fact, every young person here today, always remember the Torah of our servant Moses. Always remember Torah. Never forget Torah. We're told in Joshua to have the Torah on our lips daily. Every day we should read of the Torah of the first 5 books. Remember the Torah of my servant Moses, at whom at Horeb I prescribed laws and customs, mishpatim and chukim, for the whole of Israel. Know that I am going to send Elijah the prophet before my day comes, the great and terrible day. He shall turn the hearts of the fathers towards the children, the hearts of the children towards the fathers, lest I come and curse the land with a curse. Now Adonai gives a promise and a warning. I'm going to send Elijah the prophet. Now remember, looking back, Elijah came and spoke and fought against idolatry. All the prophets spoke against idolatry. Idolatry got us into slavery, into captivity, into all kinds of problems. But if we would remember Torah, but Adonai is going to send, in the future, Adonai is going to send Elijah to turn the hearts back for teshuvah, for repentance. Now what's interesting here is that after Malachi wrote this, Adonai stopped talking to Israel. Adonai stopped for a week. No one got prophetic words. There was no prophet in Israel for a month, for a year, for 5 years, for 10 years, for 50 years, for 100 years, for 200 years, for 300 years, for 400 years. Adonai was silent. The heavens were as brass. There was silence. All they had was the Torah. All they had was the prophets, the writings of David, the Psalms. All they had was the Hebrew scriptures. No new stuff. Nothing new coming out of heaven. That's why they were to remember the Torah. When there's nothing new, that always remember Torah. 400 years pass. And then, one day, go with me to the book of Luke, chapter 1. Then one day, after 400 years, chapter 1, verse 5. In the days of King Herod of Yehuda, in the days of King Herod, 400 years after Malachi. How long has the United States been a nation? What, 200 and what? 250 years, someplace around there? 275. Look at that. We've only been a nation. How many of you guys remember George Washington? I'm sure there's someone old enough that remembers George Washington here, huh? Our sister Evie's not here. Faye, yeah. Faye and Evie aren't here today. She's how old? 100 and what? She's 103. We have a sister that comes 103 here. She always wants to fight with me. She puts up her dukes and wants to fight. At 103, I'm always afraid of her. But think of it, we don't remember George Washington. We don't remember Plymouth Rock. You know, this is the time of our ancestors that came to New Mexico. You know, they came here over 400 years ago. You know, how many remembers Oñate? You know, or Pedro Durán y Chávez? You know, and they came here in the 1500s. They're our grandparents. In fact, my grandfather, Pedro Durán Chávez, is buried just down the road from us. They're at the little Capilla de San Jose there on La Vega Road. He's right there, 400 years ago. We don't even know who these guys are. But can you imagine 400 years later, in the days of Yehuda, King Herod of Yehuda, there lived a priest called Zachariah. Everybody say Zachariah. The word Zachariah or Zachariah, Zachar means remembers, and Yah remembers. Zachariah. Yah remembers. And it says that Yah remembers, who belonged to the Avia section of the priesthood. He belonged to what? The Avia section of the priesthood. Now remember, David, in 1 Chronicles 24, divides them into sections. Avia is the 8th section. And the Avia section, the first section serves on the first week of the biblical year, starting with the biblical new moon. On the second, go on. During Passover and Shavuot, everybody comes. And so the Avia section served on the 10th week of the year. 10th week of the year. That was right after the feast of Shavuot in late June. And so over here, Yah remembers, Zachariah, belonged to this section. And it says that he had a wife, Elisheva by name, Elisheva. Eli is my Elohim. Sheva is the covenant. Remember Beersheba? Elisheva. Elisheva means my Elohim remembers his covenant. Can you imagine? Yah remembers, is married to Elohim's covenant. Yah remembers his covenant. Just in both of their names, Yah remembers his covenant. Yah remembers his promises. Yah remembers his promises. And remember, Adonai tells Malachi, remember the Torah of my servant Moses. And I'm going to send the Eliyahu, Hanavi, Eliyahu, the prophet, before the great and terrible day. And it says there, who was a descendant of Aaron. So both of them were Kohanim. Both were Tzaddik, both were righteous in the sight of Elohim, and carefully observed all the Mishmatim and Hukim of Yahweh. So they carefully observed the Torah. So they had remembered the Torah. They had remembered the Mishpatim and the Chukim, the commandments, the observances. They had remembered these things. They kept them. But it says, but they were childless. Elisheva was barren, and they were both getting on in years. They weren't old, they were just getting on in years. By the way, they had to be under 50 because remember, 50 is retirement for a priest. And so this was the week of Aviyah. Now it was a turn of Zachariah's section to serve, the Aviyah section, on the 10th week of the year. And he was exercising his priestly office before Elohim when it fell to him by lot, as the ritual custom was, to enter the sanctuary of Yahweh and burn incense there. And at the hour of incense, the whole congregation was outside praying. So by lot, it fell to him, and he came in. And remember, the tabernacle's over here. Inside here is the Holy of Holies. The altar of incense is right here. The menorah, giant menorah, is there. The table of showbread is right here. And about where Bob is right there, it was the end. That was the house small. It was a small little place. And it says there, he went in there, and there appeared to him the angel of Yahweh. By the way, the word angel is malach. Malachi is malachi, my messenger, and a messenger from Yahweh appears to him standing to the right of the table of incense, which would be right here. Now it's my left, but from Zechariah, who would come and burn incense here at the altar of incense, it'd be to his right. And the angel of Yahweh standing to the right of the altar of incense, the sight disturbed Zachariah, who was overcome with fear. How many of you would be afraid too if you go to something like that? Can you imagine if I came over here one day and came over here and prayed, and all of a sudden this giant angel stood before me? We'd all be afraid. What happens is, the angel said to him, Zechariah, do not be afraid. Your prayer has been heard. Now the question is, what prayer? Well, first of all, twice a day, this event would happen when a priest would come and burn incense at 9 o'clock in the morning and at 3 in the afternoon. And they'd burn incense, and then he would prostrate himself with open arms before Yahweh, and he would pray, Father, let Elijah come. For 400 years they've been praying, you promised us Elijah. Let Elijah come. In fact, Israel is still waiting for Elijah. How many of in the Seder do they open up the door and say, send the kids out, Elijah, Elijah, and Elijah still doesn't come? They're waiting for Elijah till this day, and he hasn't come to them. But over here, he has one opportunity that nobody does. You see, everybody prays outside. Only one priest, twice a day, 7 days a week, 360 days a year, is available to come and pray, not only for Israel, not only burn incense, which is the symbol of prayer, all the prayers of the people. He is the mediator, but guess what? He could pray his own prayer. Him and Elisheva are childless. They're barren. What would you pray? I want a son. So I'm pretty sure he prayed for a son. And over here, it says there, the angel tells him, your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elisheva is to bear a son, and you must name him Yochanan. He will be your joy and delight, and many will rejoice at his birth, for he will be great in the sight of Yahweh, He must drink no wine, no strong drink. Even from his mother's womb he will be filled with the Ruach HaKodesh. And he will bring back many of the sons of Israel to Yahweh their Elohim with the spirit and power of Eliyahu Hanavi. He will go before him to turn the hearts of the fathers towards the children and the disobedient back to the wisdom that the virtuous have, preparing for Yahweh a people fit for him. And over here, Adonai kills 2 stones with 1 bird. Here, Adonai said, Elijah is coming. But that was 400 years ago, and they're still praying. They're still praying today. But he wants a son there, and his prayer has been heard. His prayer for a son is heard, but the priest's prayer, what he prayed as a priest for Elijah, was also heard at the same time in the same person of this promised son of Adonai remembers his covenant. And of course, the sight shocked him, and the angel says, I am Gabriel, the one who's by Adonai's side. Remember, he came to Daniel. And of course, he couldn't believe, wait a second, I'm old, my wife is old. And all of a sudden, Adonai zipped his throat. He couldn't speak. He took a long time. Everybody saying, what's happened? What's happened? He goes out and he's unable to speak. And they knew something happened. And it says there in verse 23, when the time of the service came to an end and he returned home, sometime later his wife Elisheva conceived, and for 5 months she kept to herself. Yahweh has done great things for me. So for 5 months she kept to herself. The first 5 months of her pregnancy, from late June, she kept hidden. So from June, July, August, September, October, November, December, January, February, March. That means that Yochanan was born in March, in the first month of the year, which is the month of Aviv. In the month of Aviv, he was born. What happens in Aviv? 14th, Pesach. He was born in Pesach. And that's one of the reasons why at Pesach, at Passover, we open the doors, because he's supposed to come at Pesach. And he did. And he did. In verse 26, it says, in the 6th month of Elisheva's pregnancy. In the 6th month of Elisheva's pregnancy, the angel Gabriel, by the way, when was the 6th month? In December, at the time of Hanukkah, we're going to see. In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by Elohim to a town in Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to a man named Joseph of the house of David. And the virgin's name was Miriam. And he went and said to her, rejoice, so highly favored, Yahweh is with you. She was deeply disturbed by these words and asked herself what this greeting could mean. But the angel said, Miriam, do not be afraid. You have won the favor of Elohim. Listen, you are to conceive and bear a son, and you must name him Yeshua. Not Jesus, not Jesus, not Yehoshua, or all kinds of other Yeshua or Yahuwah, or I don't know. There's all these kinds of names that people are coming up with. But Yeshua. He will be great, Gadol, and will be called Ben El Elyon, the Son of the Most High. And Yahweh Elohim will give him the throne of his ancestor David. And he will rule over the house of Yaakov. Boy, this is a very Jewish thing. Forever, and his reign will have no end. Miriam said to the angel, but how can this come about, since I am a virgin? A Parthenos in Greek. The Ruach HaKodesh will come upon you, the angel said, and the power of El Elyon, the Most High, will cover you with his shadow. And so the child will be Kadosh, holy, and will be called Ben Elohim, the son of Elohim. Know this too, your kinswoman Elisheva has in her old age herself conceived a son, and Shem, whom people call barren, is now in her 6th month. For nothing is impossible to Elohim. I am the handmaid of Yahweh, said Miriam. Let what you have done be done to me. And at that moment, when she said, let what you have said be done to me, at that moment, miraculously, she conceived in her heart. The Ruach HaKodesh came over her as a shadow, and the power of Elohim came, and she conceived Yeshua immediately. This was in the 6th month of Elisheva. Now it's December. Now it's Hanukkah time. And from December, you get to late September, and late September, early October is the month of Tishri, the 7th month. The 7th month. So Yeshua was born not on December 25th. Yeshua was born on the first day, the 15th of the 7th month, at the Feast of Tabernacles. And he came, John says, the Word became flesh, and he tabernacled among us. And we beheld his glory, the glory as the only begotten of Elohim. Well, if Yeshua wasn't born on December 25th, who was born on December 25th? Anybody here born on December 25th? Ariel was born on December 26th. But nobody was born, all kinds of people are born on December 25th. But the reason people celebrate December 25th goes way back to Babylon. It goes back to Nimrod, the first globalist, the first dictator of the world, the first one-worlder. And it goes back to him, to his wife, and to their son, Semiramis and Tammuz, or Ishtar, where we get the word Easter from. And Tammuz was born on December 25th. Therefore, from then on, all the gods were born on December 25th. All the gods are the same demonic spirit with different names in different countries and different places. And so you have the feast of Dionysius. In fact, Dionysius plays heavily with Hanukkah, because December 25th is the birthday of Dionysius, the god of wine, the god of drunkenness, of partying, the god of all this bad stuff. And they were actually celebrating the feast of Dionysius in the book of Maccabees. You could read how they were even doing Dionysius parades, and they were parading, and they would have parades for Dionysius on December 25th, just like Christmas parades. Guess where they come from? From Dionysius. And they would wear these wreaths, circle wreaths of evergreen around the necks of the boys, and all the boys would go with these wreaths in their heads, going in procession. Paganism, pornographic paganism. That's what that is. And it's interesting that not only Dionysius was born then, but Mithra. Mithra was another celebration of the Persians that came into Rome. And another Roman celebration at the time was the Saturnalia. The Saturnalia was from the 17th to the 25th, and it was a whole week of merrymaking and all kinds of fertility cult stuff. One of the things that's important for us is to know that the reason for the season is not Yeshua. Yeshua is not the reason for the season. Yeshua is the reason for Sukkot. Yeshua is the reason for Pesach, for Bekurim, for unleavened bread, for Shavuot. Yeshua is the reason for the biblical feasts. Every one of you could. These are the 7 biblical holy days, feasts. You could find Yeshua there. He's the reason for the feasts of Israel. But Yeshua is not the reason for this season. It's Dionysius. It's Mithra. It's the Saturnalia season. Right now we're in the Saturnalia season. We're in the season of merrymaking and present giving and Yule logs and mistletoe and all those kinds of things. And all these things are pagan. And Christianity has married paganism. And Christianity today, in the Catholic Church and the Protestant churches, because remember, Protestants are just protesting Catholics. Protestants are protesting Catholics. And if you worship on Sunday, if you worship December 25th, if you Easter Sunday, Good Friday, by the way, if anybody wants one during the week, we have this book on sale, 3 Days and 3 Nights in the Tomb. Specifically shows, it's $12, and specifically shows that Yeshua did not die on Good Friday and rise on Sunday morning, because Good Friday to Sunday morning is only 37 hours. It's only, what? 2 nights and 1 day. Well, he said 3 days and 3 nights. So all those things are pagan, because it was Tammuz who died on a Friday and supposedly resurrected on Easter Sunday, the day of Ishtar Day, where the Queen Mother and him, the son, got married. The Madonna, the mother and child, and the Madonna figure goes from Ishtar to Tammuz to Isis to all these things in paganism, Egypt, Babylon, Canaanite, the Druids, the Teutonic people up in northern Germany. It's all there. It's the same lies. And so today, especially for those of you that are new this year to Messianic, one of the things is that we are not in the Christmas season. By the way, the word Christmas is a Roman Catholic term. When they used to say Merry Christmas, the word Christmas means the Mass of Christ, Christ Mass, and it's midnight Mass. So if you're telling someone Merry Christmas, you're actually telling them, have a good midnight Mass. That's what you're telling them. But again, tradition comes and tradition goes, and we say things, we do things, not even know what they mean. So if somebody tells you, have a good Mass of Christ, do you tell them back, well, have a good Mass of Christ too? You know? So we're in this time. Society today has made Christmas for the children. And so one of the things is that the lie has been fed to the children. The children believe a lie. And so people think that, oh man, I can't hurt the children. But I want us to start being biblical men and women. I am so glad we have so many children that could start the truth from the beginning up. Because let me tell you, most of the pagan holidays that have come into Christianity, sometimes it's the adults that want to do more Christmas. It's the adults. Have you noticed that it's the adults that really love dressing up on Halloween? All the girls at the bank and all, they love, it's more of an adult type thing. But if we train and grow up our children in the way they should go, when they are old, they shall not soon depart. There's so much on this, and the film by Jim Staley and that they're going to show afterwards is very, very good. It's probably the best video that Jim Staley has ever produced. And so that's the only one that I recommend, because he does what almost every researcher does when you find out. And by the way, if you don't believe what I say, search the scriptures to see if these things be so. And if you don't believe the scriptures, or the people you talk about don't believe the scriptures, tell them to go to the Encyclopedia Britannica. That'll tell you how pagan it is. And you know what? If you still don't believe the Encyclopedia Britannica, I want you to do this. Go to a Catholic priest, a Baptist minister, a Presbyterian, Lutheran, whatever, and ask him, is Christmas pagan? And they will tell you, yes, it is. Because in our seminaries, in our Bible schools, we are taught that it's pagan, but if you tell them the truth, they'll leave. But let me tell you, if you tell people the truth, they won't come. If you tell them the lies, they're filled. You get a handsome guy with a nice suit, talks with a nice voice. Everything is for you. Adonai has blessing, and all that. He fills what? Old football stadiums or whatever. But those are the lies. Don't be afraid, little flock, Adonai says. The truth is with the little flock, not with the mobs of people. While most people in America are Christian, very few are true Bible believers. I want every one of you to be a true Torah observant Bible believer. Let's stand. Yevrechecha Yahweh vayishmerecha, Ayir Yahweh panav elecha vichunecha, Asa Yahweh panav elecha, vayasem lecha. Shalom. May Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May Yahweh lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you his peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a good day. And are we going to break bread here?